Alright fellas, Keith Thurman is back. He just faced off against an angry Brock Jarvis and well, it went how we all expected. After a multiple year layoff, we finally saw Thurman back in the ring and he proved he could turn back the clock a few years and still put on a great performance. So I want to talk about how this promotion came to be, what happened in the fight, as well as what's next for Thurman. So stay with me as we unpack all of it. Now, let's be honest, this promotion has been a bit of a weird one. For you fight fans who aren't living in Australia, you might not have even known Thurman was making his return. Brock Jarvis is also a name you most likely have never heard of. His biggest fight was against Liam Paro on Matchroom's first Aussie card, in which he got knocked out in the first round. Brock started his career at 115 pounds, now he finds himself fighting Thurman at 153. A bit of a jump from just a couple bouts ago where he was fighting at 140. He's not a bad little fighter, but really he just hasn't been tested. Most known to the Aussie boxing fan as the bloke sometimes trained by Jeff Fenech. He's decent, but nothing amazing. The only reason I reckon this fight even happened in the first place was because Tszyu didn't want to jump straight into a Thurman match and wanted a tune-up before that fight. So No Limit had to match Thurman up with someone for the meanwhile, and Brock Jarvis fit the bill. I don't think No Limit even wanted to risk throwing Zerafa in there, just because he's a bigger name in the Oz scene, and there's no reason sacrificing him for Thurman's tune-up. Thurman is one of those blokes who does talk a lot, but genuinely seems like a great dude. Leading into this build-up, he started off not really mouthing off at all, but once Jarvis started, it was a free-for-all for Thurman. Jarvis doesn't seem really like the type to mouth off anyway, but I reckon behind the scenes No Limit Promotions is telling their fighters to talk to sell fights. We saw this late last year with Janibek Mikhailovic. He went from being a pretty likeable bloke on the Oz scene to being one of the least. And a lot of Aussies just didn't like the cocky carry-on that he brought towards that Janibek fight. And for all that talk, not surprisingly, he ended up getting thrown around the ring by Janibek. So fast forward a few months and we have the exact same scenario. Really an undeserving fighter mouthing off on an opponent for no good reason. In countries like Australia and the UK and potentially maybe the US, I don't know, there's a lot of talk about tall poppy syndrome being prevalent. For the most part, the Australian boxing community is pretty supportive, unless you act like a bit of an average bloke. Be massively disrespectful, cocky, or just plain rude, people aren't gonna love you. That's why people ended up liking fighters like Tszyu more than say a Zerafa. And in my experience it showed. Most people weren't supporting the Aussies. In different people and gyms I was talking to in the lead up to the fight, I heard pretty much everyone go, yeah, I want Thurman to win just to shut up Jarvis. Fast forward to fight night, the footage on the broadcast that was showing a Jarvis was some of the weirdest I've ever seen pre-fight. The bloke only had on his underwear pretty much for the whole time in the dressing room. And then they put his gloves and shoes on, but no trunks, until the very last moment. He was just standing there in his underwear, gloves, and shoes. Also, Brock just kept repeatedly banging the back of his head. It was just all a bit odd. But the fight itself showed basically what we all expected. Brock came in angry, and Thurman let him get that anger out across the first round. Once the adrenaline dropped for Brock, he was in a world of trouble. Thurman started his lateral movement, and in the third hit Brock with a number of shots which hurt him and eventually put him down with a left uppercut. Brock did get up again, but Thurman quickly put him back down and ended the fight. So Thurman has taken home the win. What's next? Well, the most obvious option would be Tim Tszyu. That's why he's out in Australia to begin with. Plans already seen drawn up, but I wouldn't say final. Tim has his own matchup coming in early April against Joey Spencer. Joey isn't a bad fighter, and what I really hoped that they were going to learn from the last camp was not to overlook opponents. I think Tszyu isn't this time round, but God, it sounds like everyone from his camp and promotional team is. And after a performance like Tim's last fight, that's really not a good thing to be repeating. In their last camp, that was a huge factor which played into everything that went down. They were looking 2, 3, 4, 5 fights ahead instead of what was in front of him. Tszyu was planning his dream life, selling his cars in Australia, looking to get married, looking for houses in America, and when it came to fight night, instead of coming out and boxing his usual fight, he came out trying to KO him just to get him out the way. And that's where it all went wrong. So seemingly once again, it seems like they're kinda looking past their current opponent ahead to the Thurman matchup. It's just not good for the Tszyu camp, and it's not great for Thurman either. Tszyu has to make it past Spencer, because if he loses, that Thurman matchup is never happening. There's also been rumours that Thurman returned to PBC for a show in the States, with a showdown against Jamel Charlo even being rumoured. To be honest, I wouldn't mind this. I reckon that would be a pretty entertaining build-up and a pretty entertaining fight. Even as an Aussie, I think Thurman deserves a bigger stage than an internal Australian card, and I'd love to see him back on the big stage against Tszyu or even a big American fight night. Injuries have been a problem for Thurman, yet this performance showed that he can turn back the clock. and hopefully should have a few fights ahead of him, but I don't think he'll be the last American we see weirdly boxing in Australia. The rumours floating around over here in the press is that No Limit Promotions will be targeting the likes of Caleb Plant and Rolly Romero if he loses against Garcia for future bouts in Australia. They're kind of becoming a refuge spot for PBC fighters who haven't been able to get fights or names looking to rebound and still get paid. No Limit for all you fellas overseas is Australia's major promotion. When you hear No Limit Boxing, think Australia. They borderline have a monopoly on all the competition over here, basically due to their connections with cable TV provider Foxtel, which was a part of the broader Murdoch Media network. They've had all the push in Australia simply because they're the only promotion showing on TV and in the press. Most of the public wouldn't know who Jai Opetaia is, simply because he's not a no-limit fighter, and as a result he receives little media coverage even when he goes and say wins a world title. Yet DAZN has recently bought Foxtel, the cable TV network, and has been pushing their own Australian promotional company Tasman, which Kambosos is fighting on in a couple weeks' time. With this purchase, No Limit's future looks a bit complicated. I'm not sure if DAZN will swallow them up or kick them out, and maybe the luring of these big American stars is a push to try and show they still have power. But I guess only time will tell what truly happens to him. But just back on track, it's just nice to see Keith Thurman back in boxing. He's one of those fighters who's always entertaining. It's been a shame he's been out of the ring for so long. Yet hopefully this will be the start of a successful run for him. At 36, he probably doesn't have too much long left in the game. And after being plagued with injuries, who knows how many bouts he truly has left. Yet hopefully if everything goes to plan, he returns properly to big time boxing. And hey, if it all goes wrong, man, I really hope he starts his own YouTube channel. Now let me know what you thought of the fight, as well as what you think might be next for Keith Thurman. Let me know all your thoughts down below. But thanks for watching fellas, and I'll catch you in the next one.